Andrew Leslie is joining me. He's a former top member of the Canadian military. Always good to see you. He was a lieutenant general. Mr. Leslie, thanks for coming on the program.
Thanks, Todd. Keep up the great work.
You know, the United States, Andrew, saying that it's possible the capital could fall within the next few days. We're listening to Ihor, who's telling us, you know, the Ukrainians are fighting back. They're doing much better than the Russians might have expected. Your thoughts on what we're seeing on the ground? And I appreciate it's very difficult to get accurate information. There's a lot of dis and misinformation flying around.
First and foremost, I think we should all recognize the outstanding courage and leadership of the president of Ukraine. Talk about grace under fire. And switching quickly to Napoleon, the morale is to the physical is 3-1. So I have no doubt that the heart of the Ukrainian people are firmly in the fight. They're willing to sacrifice all to maintain their freedom, but they have to defend across the entirety of the nation, whereas the attacking Russian troops can focus their energies and their equipment on certain specific narrow fronts and overwhelm by localized mass, any of the defenders. So if the capital falls, it doesn't mean that the war is over. The war for Ukraine, unlike what President Putin thinks, is not just simply marching through the Ukraine, because once he actually has the capital, there's still the other cities that he has to deal with, and the spirit and passion of the Ukrainian people will result in a very bloody occupation force withdrawing eventually back to Russia.
You know, Kyiv is about 3-4 million people, Andrew. I mean, that's, you know, basically, let's compare it to the size of Toronto. I mean, how do you go about capturing a city of that size? And what does that even mean when we say, and we're showing some of the reported Russian advance here as we're talking to you, some of the key airports, the presidential office is there in the center. If the goal is to take out the Ukrainian government, they have to go in there. But, you know, how do you go about capturing a city? What does that even look like?
Well, capturing the city would come later. And that is, by the way, the most brutal, bitter, intense of all fighting, anywhere, at any time. But in Russia's case, President Putin has said several times that his intent is to decapitate the leadership of the Ukraine. And to do that, he doesn't need the whole city. So that's why you see the focused energy in and around the presidential grounds, around the governance structures. And once he secures those, he might well either extricate those who survive or set up some sort of fortress, some sort of concentrated defensive zone while his next step of the plan unfolds. Having said all that, it's still my belief that he intends to sweep through the entirety of the Ukraine. And I would argue we are probably at the most single dangerous moment in my lifetime, 35 years of which was spent in the army, in terms of the shadow of World War III.
I wonder how long, realistically as well, you think the Ukrainian military can actually hold out.
Well, it's a variety of people have tried, and of course you've already referred to the Nazi-led last time this happened. It's hard to predict. It could be a matter of weeks. It could be a matter shorter than that. Their spirit and passion is intense, but if the Russians stay away from the cities and focus on getting across the entirety of the length of Ukraine and call that a victory, so be it. The spirit and the resolute defense of the Ukrainian people will continue. So just because you, quote, capture it, doesn't mean you control it.
I was talking about Russian misinformation, and I mean, the propaganda campaign that's being waged within Russia itself and elsewhere is just sort of mind-boggling. But, you know, in their view, they're now saying, look, you know, we're, quote, open to negotiations as long as you agree to surrender.
Typical Putin bluster. And by the way, that's not exactly a negotiation. Here, I'm pointing a gun at your head. Please surrender. There's no please in there, and that's not tenable. So I don't blame the Ukraine people for rejecting that out of hand, as the president has done. What we might want to think about, though, is perhaps next steps, because so far we've been playing catch up to Putin.
Right.
And I think he's going to keep going, or there's a risk of that, and we should plan on the worst case.
Tell me about can I ask you about a no-fly zone, too, as you're talking about worst-case scenarios here? Because there's discussion about, you know, NATO somehow putting in a no-fly zone and whether you think that's realistic. I mean, are we talking about, you know, NATO assets being used to shoot down Russian air assets over Ukraine?
I'm very glad you asked that. It's not going to happen. And I'll tell you why it can't happen right now, because that would put NATO pilots in direct confrontation with Russian pilots. And that could be a precursor trigger to the start of something extraordinarily dangerous, which could lead to Armageddon. And I don't want to exaggerate here. This is an extraordinarily dangerous time. I think the West and President Biden are playing it smart. They've imposed a tough series of sanctions, but it's what happens next. And a lot of American colleagues, led by the President of the United States, believe that Putin is not finished. So it behooves us all to step up to the plate and contribute troops as a bulwark, as a deterrence, as mentioned by Minister Anand, and your earlier very good talk, get some troops over there, a lot of them, as soon as we can, not within 30 days, but as soon as we can get them on airplanes, to present unpalatable choices to Mr. Putin, where he has to realize he's going to have to fight to break into NATO, and after that, Article 5 kicked in.
Andrew Leslie, a former top member of the Canadian military, as he said, served with the military for 35 years, also a member of the Liberals as well. Thank you for this, Andrew. I really appreciate you coming on the program, and we really appreciate your expertise here at CTV News, I just want to say, and we look forward to talking to you again as this story, unfortunately, will continue.
Anytime, Todd. Thank you.